Most gyms have a range of different equipment available to use. There are free weights, machines, and everything else in between. But which type of exercise is best for muscle growth? And when might you want to select one exercise type over another? To answer these questions, we first need to define exactly what free weight and machine-based exercises are. While these are often seen as two distinct exercise types, there are also some other types of exercises which don't necessarily fall into either category. So I think exercise types are best categorized on a spectrum. On one end, we have free weights. These are exercises which use standalone objects such as barbells and dumbbells. These exercises are characterized by free movement in any direction. Because of this, they also usually require more stability from other muscles and joints, since the lifter is required to control the exact movement path of the lift. And the direction of resistance is always downward due to the forces of gravity. On the other end of the spectrum, we have machines. Machines have a fixed movement pattern that cannot be altered. Because of this, they usually have lower stability requirements. And unlike free weights, machines can also provide resistance in different directions depending on the machine. However, we also have many other types of exercises which don't exactly fall into either category. Exercises using Smith machines, cables, and bodyweight have some characteristics of each. Bodyweight exercises are probably more similar to free weights, cables are probably more similar to machines, while Smith machines are probably somewhere in the middle. And even with machines, there are both pin-loaded and plate-loaded variants which differ slightly in their characteristics too. So which end of the exercise spectrum is best for muscle growth? More free weight-based exercises or machine-based exercises? The best evidence we have on this topic is this meta-analysis, which analysed the body of evidence comparing free weights versus machines on various different outcomes. Of the 5 studies which measured hypertrophy, we can see that some of them saw superior growth using free weights, shown in the black bars, and some from machines, shown in the grey bars. So the overall finding was that both exercise types are effective for muscle growth with no significant differences between them. Also, it should be noted that the way machines are defined in many of these studies differs to what we discussed earlier. For example, this individual study compared the following free weight versus machine-based exercises. For free weights, the following exercises were performed. As we can see, bodyweight exercises were also characterized as free weight lifts. For the machine group, the following exercises were performed. And as we can see, this included some Smith machine exercises, cable exercises, and some more classic machines. At the end of the 8-week study, biceps and quadriceps saw similar increases in muscle thickness between both groups. However, the point to mention here is that most of these studies don't compare purely free weight versus machines. It is usually more free weight based versus machine based exercises. In any case, it seems that both free weights and machines can both be highly effective for muscle growth, and neither is inherently better in all cases. This is likely because hypertrophy is stimulated via stress and tension. The pathways which muscle growth is triggered aren't specific to any exercise type. If the exercise is effective at training the muscle group we are trying to grow, then it doesn't really matter if it is a free weight or machine-based lift. Instead, we should be trying to implement exercises which are effective at training the muscle close to true muscular failure with dynamic contractions through a large range of motion. So although on average neither exercise type is specifically better than the other, there are some potential benefits and negatives when training on either end of the exercise spectrum. Let's now cover what each of them are. First is the resistance profile of the exercise. This refers to how much resistance an exercise provides at different parts of the range of motion. Ideally, we would want to implement exercises which provide adequate resistance throughout the full range of motion, or at least bias more resistance to the lengthened range of the movement. This was seen in this study, which compared the effects of different resistance profiles on muscle growth. 38 women with a minimum of 6 months lifting experience performed bicep curl training for 9 weeks. One group performed the seated incline dumbbell curl, which has more resistance in the top position when the biceps are more shortened, while the other group performed the dumbbell preacher curl, which has more tension in the bottom position when the biceps are more lengthened. It was found that the preacher curl resulted in superior biceps growth, shown in the orange, compared with the incline dumbbell curl, shown in the blue. In this example, both exercises were free weight lifts, but the resistance profile was different. But in some cases, either machines or free weights might have a slight advantage over each other based on the resistance profile of the exercise. For example, any free weight squat variation is usually a very effective hypertrophy exercise, as it is most difficult in the bottom of the exercise. This is when the quads and glutes are in the most stretched position, which tends to be the most hypertrophic portion of an exercise. Whereas most free weight rows are more difficult in the end range when the back muscles are most shortened, and easiest in the initial range when the back muscles are most stretched. So in this case, a machine that has a variable resistance profile might be beneficial to increase the amount of resistance in the lengthened position and decrease the amount of resistance in the shortened position. The next factor to consider is the specific movement pattern that the exercise allows us to perform. Ideally, we want to train the target muscle from the most stretched position to the most shortened position during an exercise, or at least have the ability to do so. And the movements which allow this will be dependent on the anatomy of each muscle. Most machines have a fixed movement pattern which you can't change very much. This means the movement pattern might not train the target muscle in the most effective way based on your specific anatomy. More specifically, it might not train the target muscle through as much range of motion, or the movement might not align as well with the target muscle. This is because machines aren't designed specifically for your individual height, limb proportions, bone structure, and muscle anatomy. Whereas free weights, and cables for that matter, have more degrees of freedom that you are able to move through. You can move the bar or dumbbell slightly further forward, back, up, down, to the side, etc., which cannot be achieved with fixed machines. This usually allows us to make each exercise slightly more suitable for our individual anatomy because we can make small tweaks to the movement pattern of the exercise. So if we have the ability to train a muscle from a more stretched position to a more contracted position, it should hypothetically result in superior growth with all other factors equated. The next variable to consider is the direction that the exercise provides a resistance in. As we have mentioned, free weights only allow resistance to be applied downward due to the forces of gravity. This means that we need to manipulate our body position around the load based on what muscles we are trying to train. For example, we load the barbell on our back for squats, lay down to perform a bench press, and bend forward to perform a row. We can also train a muscle from different angles by manipulating the exercise setup too. For example, we can perform a bench press at various different angles to bias different regions of the chest. However, machines and cables allow resistance to be applied from different directions. So instead of having to manipulate body position so much, we can manipulate what direction the resistance comes from. For example, we can perform chest flies from various different angles to bias certain fibers of the pec muscle. Some machines also allow us to provide resistance from different directions throughout the range of motion. For example, leg extension and leg curl machines provide resistance through an arc-shaped profile. So with both exercise types, you are able to train each muscle from different angles. However, machines and cables usually allow this to be achieved with slightly more accuracy and probably with easier exercise setup. And the last influential factor to consider is stability. This refers to how much movement is allowed from other joints which aren't directly involved in the exercise. In most cases, greater stability is usually favourable for muscle growth. This is likely because there is less room for technique deviation, so there is less compensation from other muscles. And this would hypothetically allow the target muscle to be trained closer to true muscular failure, since the set is less likely to be limited by fatigue of other muscles. Furthermore, this research review investigated the role of instability during resistance training. The researchers concluded that unstable conditions resulted in lower overall force output and increases the activity of opposing muscles. While this may be beneficial for balance and coordination training, it probably isn't ideal for muscle growth. Generally, machines are going to provide more stability compared with free weights. This is because they have benches and pads which lock certain joints in place. They also have a more fixed movement pattern which prevents the lifter from changing the movement. So in many cases, machines might allow lifters to train a muscle closer to true failure. For example, a hack squat keeps the torso in a fixed position, preventing the hips from shifting backward and the torso falling forward. This is going to be favourable to keep maximal tension on the quadriceps. However, in the realm of traditional resistance training, most exercises are stable enough to not be a hindrance. And this is even less of a concern for more advanced lifters who have excellent lifting technique. These lifters are probably able to bias tension towards a specific muscle group and train that muscle to true muscular failure using free weights. So this concept of stability is probably only really a concern for less experienced lifters who aren't yet very proficient with their technique of some free weight lifts. So while both machines and free weights can be effective for the purposes of muscle growth, another factor to consider is the effect on strength and athletic performance goals. If we go back to the meta-analysis we looked at earlier, the researchers also investigated the effects on strength and jump performance. It was found that strength was best developed based on the strength goal. In other words, machines were better for getting stronger on machine lifts, while free weights were better for strength gains on free weight lifts. And in terms of vertical jump height, both were effective, but there appeared to be a slight benefit for training with free weights over machines. But this wasn't considered statistically significant. This might influence which lifts we implement in our training routine. If you have additional strength goals, you would probably want to train that specific lift, whether that be a free weight or machine exercise. And if you have additional sport performance goals involving running and jumping, it might be helpful to include more free weight lifts in your routine. In addition to just the hypertrophic stimulus an exercise provides, we also need to consider its effects on fatigue. There are two fatigue-related considerations which can be influenced by exercise type. First is systemic fatigue. This refers to the global fatigue cost of training affecting the central systems. While systemic fatigue is not an easy to quantify concept, there is some evidence to suggest that free weights might be slightly more systemically fatiguing compared with machines. This was seen in this study, which compared the acute effects of training with free weights versus machines. 10 men with at least 6 months resistance training experience performed back squats and leg presses for 6 sets of 10 reps with 80% 1RM, with 2 minutes rest between sets on 2 separate occasions. It was found that blood lactate was greater after the squat training compared with the leg press. Also, heart rate was greater after each set of squats and took longer to drop after training. Furthermore, growth hormone, testosterone, and cortisol all increased to a greater and more prolonged extent after the squat training. So overall, it seems that it might be a little more systemically fatiguing to perform some free weight lifts compared with similar machines. So if your routine consists of all free weight lifts, it might require more rest between sets, training with a slightly further proximity from failure, or performing less total weekly volume to manage fatigue. And the other fatigue consideration is joint stress. This refers to the amount of strain imposed on the joints and connective tissue involved in each lift. For each individual lifter, certain exercises tend to cause some level of irritation for certain joints. And excessive joint stress can result in pain or injury over time if not managed appropriately. So if you find that a specific exercise causes joint discomfort, it is probably worth changing it to a different exercise which trains the same muscle group. This isn't really specific to either free weight or machine-based exercises, it is just a principle of exercise selection in general. And the last and probably most important determinant of which exercise we select is equipment availability. Depending on the gym you train at, you might have greater or fewer exercise options to choose from. Most gym facilities have free weights and provide the ability to perform bodyweight exercises, while the availability of machines may be more or less extensive based on the facility. However, some less equipped facilities, such as hotel gyms, might primarily have machines to train with and minimal free weight options. And a home gym setup might have a multi-rack system with barbells, a Smith machine, and a few cables. So there isn't really a specific recommendation here. It should just be noted that you may be limited by the equipment available at any given training facility. And since muscle growth can be achieved with a range of different exercise types, this isn't a major issue. You can likely still provide a very good hypertrophic stimulus with whatever equipment you have available. Taking all this information, let's now establish some practical recommendations. When classifying exercises, there are not only 2 separate categories. There are exercise types that involve some characteristics of both free weight and machine-based exercises. So this is probably more of a spectrum rather than 2 distinct exercise types. Free weight exercises are characterized by allowing more freedom of movement, have less stability, and always produce resistance in a downward direction. Machine-based exercises are characterized by having a fixed movement pattern, have more stability, and can provide resistance in multiple different directions. Overall, all types of exercises on this spectrum can be highly effective for muscle growth, with no clear benefit to any specific type. although we might preference one exercise type over another based on the resistance profile, movement pattern, resistance direction, and stability of the exercise. Furthermore, if you have other performance-related goals, you might preference one exercise type over another. For strength goals, you want to train the exercise that you want to get stronger at, whether that be a free weight or machine exercise. And for athletic performance-related goals, free weight lifts are probably going to be slightly more advantageous than machine lifts. In terms of fatigue, free weights might be slightly more systemically fatiguing than machines on average. And in terms of joint stress, we want to avoid exercises which cause any form of pain or irritation on the joints or connective tissue. This isn't directly relevant to either free weights or machines, it is dependent on the individual lifter and the exact exercise. And lastly, the exercises we select in practice are going to be influenced by which equipment we have available at our current training facility. And based on the evidence, you can likely achieve a great hypertrophy stimulus with whatever equipment you have access to. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.